proposed rules and regulations for the advisory board of interpreters. Elizabeth Pittman.
Thank you again. These are the proposals and regulations for the advisory board for interpreters for short. They met, I believe, on March 6th, and they approved these changes, the advisory board for interpreters. And then we, as a subcommittee, met in March as well, and they were also approved by the subcommittee. The interpreters board would like to change the rules to clarify some points that were a little confusing with the first draft. First, they want to add the phrase interpreter in the definitions of licensed provisional interpreter and licensed qualified interpreter, so that it's clarified that anywhere the word interpreter is used in the rules after that, it refers to all types of licensed interpreters. Before, it was not quite as clear. They also want to clarify the requirements for both initial licensure and renewal licensure. There was some confusion, particularly over renewal last October and November, and what documents needed to be submitted. So hopefully this new rule will help clarify that. We got about 5 different versions of a renewal application last year. So we're trying to streamline that a little bit and make sure everybody knows what to send, and we don't have as many going back to applicants to make sure we have the right documentation. They also added a section on teaming to the summary of credentials. Teaming is basically where an interpreter who meets the required level or a credential level for that type of interpreting, say in a medical setting, you have to have a certain level, and you have an interpreter that has that level. And there's an interpreter who doesn't meet it yet, but they want to work with the higher level interpreter. They can team together as long as the higher level interpreter agrees to ensure communication is adequate and to supervise the lower level interpreter. And that's just so that we need more interpreters at higher levels across the state, so that we have more interpreters who can serve in all these settings. That's just to help train them to bring them up to higher levels. The next thing is they are moving around some of the settings and proficiency levels, and there's actually an ongoing committee to discuss that. It's chaired by a member of the deaf community and has several members of the interpreting community on it. So they're trying to work out what level of credential you actually need, and trying to make sure that it's not so high that that nobody in the state can actually interpret in a medical setting or in a school setting or whatever the case might be. And then, of course, the last one is we have not received any complaints yet, and they've received them anonymously, but they haven't actually had anybody willing to put their name on a complaint. So to try to help facilitate making sure people are licensed, they are going to let them file a complaint, allow a board member to file a complaint based on information they receive. That board member would then have to recuse themselves from any investigation of the complaint, from any hearing on the complaint. And of course, once it's investigated, we would have to substantiate the complaint itself. We couldn't rely on the verbal information at all. But it just allows them a mechanism to begin looking into some of these complaints where people who are not licensed are interpreting. And so that's what that's for. If you have any questions about any of that, I would be happy to answer them.
Does this in any way include a family member or a staff person in an office from interpreting, although not getting paid, to keep that from happening?
I think if they're not getting paid, it's not precluded, and family members can. I know specifically under the Act, family members are allowed to interpret. In church settings, you don't have to have a credential to
I'm
interpret.
talking about a medical office.
In a medical office, if a family member comes in, that would not be precluded.
How about a staff member of the office?
I would have to look into that one a little bit better. If they're not getting paid, I don't think it would fall under this either.
Okay. That would be important.
It would be.
This is Jan Lamucci. Does the interpreter cover signing? It does.
It's signing, cued speech, any deaf interpreting.
I heard you say deaf somewhere in there. So.
Yes, I'm sorry, I shortened the name of the board, so I wrote that part off. But it's hearing between an individual, interpreting between an individual who can hear and an individual who cannot. So, and that's all included in their really long board name.
Yes, sir.
This is Dr. Zini. I'm a little concerned about being able to file a complaint anonymously. I felt like I'd like a little more understanding of how that would happen, because I feel it's a basic right that anyone should be able to have the ability to face their accuser.
Well, there is a constitutional right to face your accuser in criminal law, and I don't think that necessarily falls over into civil law, which is why some particular statutes do allow anonymous complaints, for example, child maltreatment. But all of that being said, the point of this is not so that we have an anonymous complaint that is the sole basis for taking action on a license. We wouldn't be able to do that. They would have to have an investigation that would substantiate whatever that complaint was. And if they couldn't substantiate it with some other evidence, some other testimony, then we would be able to go anywhere with it. So they would not be able to rely on a complaint alone at all.
Is that understood, or is there language that protects
I don't know if it's in
the
the law
person, the
itself,
interpreter?
but I have explained that to them when we did this. I explained that to them that they can do that, but they would not be able to rely on that complaint. And I believe they understand that. Now, we can go back in and add some language that would make that clear if we need to.
I think we ought to. I know as precedent, there are other boards in the state that do not allow anonymous. I served on the medical board, and we would never take an anonymous complaint without substantiation.
And their concern, and maybe this will help you understand where they're coming from, is a lot of this is a child who needs an interpreter, and the parent doesn't necessarily want to complain because then the child will lose all interpreting services at all and not have anybody. And so that's part of the concern and why they're wanting to do this, not to then be able to go in and take somebody's license based on an anonymous complaint, but to try to protect those individuals. Also, in the rules themselves, there is a provision that if any violation is corrected within 30 days, no action will be taken against that person at all. And that's also built into the rules. So the point is not to penalize, it's to try to make sure people are getting licensed and credentialed.
If there was language that would clarify, it's just to allow for investigation to
Yes.
substantiate or not substantiate the complaint without moving forward,
We can do that.
then I would feel comfortable with that.
I think we can add that.
So thanks.
So do we defer a vote on this?
We can, or you can vote to approve it as amended, and I'll write the language like he suggested.
That's all right. Would you put that in the form of a motion? Unless there are other questions.
I just feel very strongly we need to make clear that if I have somebody working in the office, I'm not paying them anything, but they have to interpret, because there are rules that require us to have interpreters. But I don't want to have to go out and find somebody that speaks Mandarin Chinese, although I may have one in my office that can interpret. It just bothers me that they might be able to file a complaint or something in my office.
This is only for deaf interpreters.
But it doesn't matter. They're not deaf too. I have people sign my office. They get paid to do it. I mean,
Just to clarify, this rule doesn't have to do with interpreting other language, spoken language.
They still sign it, whatever. It's just bothers me that someone can help us out in our offices.
This is a law.
Yes, it is based on a law, and that's what I wouldn't be able to tell you for sure without looking at the law, and I don't have it in front of me. But I do believe it excludes people who are not getting paid. But again, I can answer that for you after today's meeting. I can check the law and answer that for you.
So how to reconcile your concerns?
Hell, I would move to approve as amended with language that clarifies the anonymous complaint.
Is there a second?
I would just ask a question, what clarifies it in what way?
If I may, there's a section D, if you turn to page 13 of the packet there. Where added language, if a complaint is initiated by a board member, that board member shall recuse on any vote taken regarding the complaint. And we can actually add here another paragraph and move that down and make it E. And just add in there that if it is initiated by a board member, it must be investigated to substantiate the complaint. The complaint itself is not sufficient.
That would be fine, as she stated.
Second.
Did I hear a second? Fincher? Is there any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed?